Welcome to 탁Tak. And this is all you do is talk. Session number 1. My name is Carl Skarin, and I'm a writer and founder of 탁Tak. And alongside me, I have my trusted co-founder and also a writer, Asa, who's from London. And our guest today is Sean Preston from Open Pen magazine. And you are celebrating 6 years over there right now. And you are one of the founders, or maybe even the founder. So can you tell me, the story of Open Pen?
Okay, yeah, so it is our 6th year now. I started it in 2011. It was one of those things that I'd been meaning to do for some time. Obviously, I think it was born out of a frustration of being a short story writer and feeling that there wasn't enough of a movement, at least not in print, for the sort of short fiction that I wanted to write and the sort of short fiction that I wanted to read. But I put it off for so long because, with these sort of things, you're like, oh, I need the time to make it work properly. And eventually I sort of realized that, you never really get that time, actually. You just got to go for it and make it work. So we did that in sort of 2011. I started on my own. I had one other guy working with me on it at the time. So I guess he would be a co-founder as well. But, as is often the way, he had to go off and do his own thing. So the sort of first couple of years was me and whoever else wanted to help out. But we had our first issue out end of April 2011.
Yeah, you mentioned print. Why is that important to the essence of Open Pen? Why is print important?
Strange because it's less important, I think, to at least to Open Pen now, and to myself as well, actually. But at the time, I'd had a couple of things published online, and that was great. But it just felt like, online, the space online is infinite, essentially. So there's an idea that anyone can get published online and web journals, and that's fine. That's totally fine. But I think there's something about a publisher, that filter. Awarding the very limited space they have to you, that they felt that what you had to say was worthwhile enough to put into their small magazine. And I think that's what I was hoping to do with a print short fiction journal is give writers that same sort of encouragement that we really do like this piece. We're gonna pay for it. We're gonna put it in the limited space that we have.
Yeah, there's this sense of authenticity. It's like, you can show someone, like, look at this, I'm published. It's I guess it's a great feeling to be able to give to your writers in
Absolutely.
that sense.
With my generation, I'm 33 now. I started when I was mid-20s, 26, 27. And I at that age, especially, obviously, I think for most people who are around the same sort of age and growing up reading things like Kindles and that sort of stuff, or even reading online, was that sort of happened. But you grew up reading books as well, and that's that felt like a relevant way to read to me. So there was a certain sort of, as you say, an authenticity, but also like a validation that comes along with seeing your work published in print.
Yes, you mentioned that print might not be as important to Open Pen these days. What has changed during the years from you being 26 to you being 33 right now?
I think quite naturally I was very naive going into starting a print magazine, in that I wanted it to sort of grow naturally, or as they say, organically, through the print magazine and through word of mouth. But there's no defeating the power of having an online presence. And I think that when we started to realize that more and more, that social media was important, as much as I didn't want it to be, I really didn't want it to be, but it is important. And, having a website with short stories on as well, and then different features and interesting stuff about the world of short fiction. And I think you slowly realize that the way to really cultivate your brand, as it were, or, as I like to think of it a little less cynically, our fold, is that you have to go online. You have to get online, and you have to sort of get out there a bit more. It can happen just for having a print magazine and cutting yourself off from the world, but essentially, you're sort of you're just limiting yourself on what and your reach. And we're I sort of, you grow up with the magazine a little bit, and I think 3 years in, I have to realize that it's going to help writers that we publish, and it's going to help the magazine itself if we have if we try and improve our online presence.
Well, it seems like you're talking about in terms of kind of marketing. It's like, how do you increase our span to other readers? Does it feel like you're kind of removing parts of the sense of what open pen is, or like selling out, which is like
I mean, I
something.
Totally get that question, and I think is that I mean, I'll be honest about it. I think I think to a degree we have sold out a little bit, and we've had to sell out a little bit if we want to. I keep the print magazine as it was from issue 1. Essentially, it's a little bit bigger now, but other than that, it's still a free short fiction magazine that we stock in independent bookshops. We don't put the stories online as put each issue online. We might eventually publish the stories online as well. So we try and keep that intact. And I think as long as I do that, I'll feel like I haven't completely sold out from what I originally intended to do with Open Pen. But I certainly do think that, you have to kind of swallow your pride on a couple of things you thought you'd never do.
So what do you tell people that come with the accusation of you being like the slaves of, capitalism or whatever,
It doesn't happen often because we're not successful enough to warrant that sort of abuse. But when it does happen, when I have this conversation, I try to be as open with it about that question as possible, because when you start pretending you're something you're not, like, there's no point in me pretending that we're totally punk DIY, Z. We're not that anymore. We had a book out last year, and that retailed and stuff. So we've definitely moved into the world of a more traditional publisher. But we just, I just point to the magazine and I say I'm still happy to put stuff in there that's not going to fit in elsewhere. I know it's not marketable. I know that if I try to sell this story, it's only going to be relevant to a minority of people. And I think in that way, I can kind of have some sort of nous in saying that we haven't completely sold out, but we certainly have progressed, I think, is a way to put it.
Like realness, maybe you still have realness, whatever that is.
I think we do really try hard. Lots of submissions now, so that naturally you can have some writers in there who've had lots of stuff published, but I still try and give space to writers who are very much up and coming, who are just sort of starting out.
Being an editor, or also having worked at literature magazines, I know there are always like discussions about which text to publish, or and what kind of how will it kind of affect the magazine. I mean, what could you tell us about some kind of decisions of publishing that was kind of hanging in the air between editors, etc.?
So the reading team has grown quite a bit as well. So, at first it was just me, and it's very easy to say, I like this, it's going, that's that. But the problem with that is you end up creating a magazine that's too much in your image. I think it's important to put a lot of yourself into whatever you make. But the magazine sort of got bigger than that, and that I had to kind of bring more people in. So there was a little bit more of there was more of the variety to the sort of stuff that we would publish, because obviously everyone has their own taste, and I was quite keen on bringing in people that were, one, short fiction writers, but two, didn't necessarily have the same taste as me. So the within that, what would occur a lot is obviously when it comes to reading submissions, that you do have this sort of, there is an amount of debate, to put it in friendly terms, but yeah, there's certainly been some interesting conversations about what goes in and why as well. I think sometimes it takes people a bit of time to realize that I'm not necessarily publishing the very best short fiction that we've received. That a lot of the time I want to put something in because I feel like maybe there's a young writer who started out who clearly has something to say that's relevant and might be unique of what we've read before. But the actual writing isn't quite there yet. They're writing because they're still young. So that's the times I think when we tend to have more of the heated exchanges between editors, is when and trying to put something in that's not quite there yet, and they haven't really. I might want to be doing that.
Are these discussions physical sessions, or are you talking online, or
mainly online now? And that's just because of the nature of all of us having, well, most of us having, normal jobs and that sort of thing, and trying to fit it in. But now and again, it's in person as well. I mean, it's kind of better that way in person. Obviously, you hammer things out a bit more, and it's easier to get to an end point. Whereas in terms of emailing and that sort of thing, it can drag on a little bit.
right?
I have a question. I know I've seen you at writing events in London. I was wondering how that figured in, as the audience there seems bigger, but it's also limited at the same time.
Yeah, I think it's such a tough one with London, because there was obviously quite a large audience there, and then there's a core audience who will turn up to these things. But then, because of the amount of publications and different literary movements in London, and so many of them live, as you know, as being a Londoner, that it can get lost on people a little bit, because everyone's sort of shouting at the top of their voices to get people to come along to live events and that sort of thing. And I think that figures into buying things as well, like people looking to sell their magazine or sell their books or sell their poetry pamphlets. There's certainly a huge audience here, but I think people make the mistake that equates to having lots of people go to all these live events all the time, but it's not, because there's a rather saturated market. There's so many people trying to do this. I think that it's not an easy sell at all.
So how do you become like a signal in the noise of like London literature? How do you?
I think you either
make yourself stand out.
Yeah. So I think you do that in doing something that's different. That's either by design, or with us, because we're not that smart, is by sort of happy mistake. And that we, because of how I started this and what I wanted to do with it, I sort of came from a point of not really wanting to market anything and not wanting to fit into the traditional publishing crowd. I think in that was probably slightly more exciting for younger writers. So I don't know if as has been to one of the open pen events, but I think it's probably fair to say that our audience is not necessarily the usual group of people that would go to bookshop readings and that sort of thing. For instance, we tend to do a lot of our readings now in bars and that sort of thing, because it feels like more of a natural fit to what we do. So I think that has to be the way for that's true across arts as well. I think is that if you're doing something a little bit different, and if it can be authentically different, then people will sort of associate with that. And I think you can sort of cultivate a bit of an audience in that way.
Yeah, I think we've been talking also, Asa, about you kind of having like pub readings or like a pub fest or whatever, like in the future. Just finding something that isn't like the classical.
Yeah, I mean, it's
readings.
even the mistake of thinking we need to do something different, or I need to do something you look at something that is successful and you try and replicate that. And I was guilty of that, I should say, in the first couple of years. I wanted to be, that's because I wanted it to appeal to the same sort of short story writers as me.
Well, isn't it a progression? You kind of need to learn some fundamentals before you kind of try to, evolve and find your way.
In a way, I think I was trying to get away from what we originally were, being a sort of very down and dirty lit rag. I wanted to be a little bit more than that, and I realized there's other people who can do that way better than I can. And I think it would be when we realized and I think we've been called a hipster rag before, so I used to really get my back up. But I sort of realization, that is what we are, and we just need to be okay with that. And actually, it's worked out fine. Kind of knowing what you're about is a big part in this.
So hipster literature, is that the majority of the London literary scene? What's the current state out there when you said it was a saturated market?
Yeah, I think you still have the sort of high end, where you it's very much about books published by the major publishers, and then I would say that is one scene unto itself. And then there's a sort of middling publishers, indie and interesting publishers who have maybe their own crowd, but the same sort of people generally be interested in live readings and that sort of thing.
Right.
And then there's a sort of there's a crowd separate from that even, which is the sort of people. And there's a few indie publishers around who I'd say have similar sort of ethic to OpenPen, and that's very much more about young writers and up and coming writers and fiction that's not necessarily marketable in the traditional sense. Never going to sell 40,000 units, but there's nevertheless there is a sort of an interested scene.
You said that you were, yourself a writer at least at a younger age. Do you still write? And do you feel like the handling of the magazine, it kind of gets in the way of you writing?
I mean, yeah, it absolutely does. And it did for a long time. So when I started OpenPen, it pretty much took over all the time I had for, with writing. But I think over the years of reading all the submissions and then coming back to writing in the last couple of years, I think it was a good thing. I think one, the break was good. I think there's something to be said for taking a break from writing or creating or whatever it is that you're into, back to it with fresh eyes and probably wiser outlook on the whole thing. But more than that, just reading through the submissions, all that time, it was kind of it was an awakening as to the kind of stuff I shouldn't be doing. Like there's so many, as you guys know, the submissions you get through, you're like, this doesn't work, and you can you slowly understand.
Yeah.
And then worse than that, you think, oh man, I used to do this, and then you can sort of eradicate that from your writing, which is quite cynical actually. But I certainly think that it helps me in my writing.
Yeah,
absolutely. Reading through other stuff teaches you very quickly what not to do.
And I don't think I would have necessarily had that understanding. I don't think I would have had that moment of realization if it hadn't been for looking through lots of submissions from people who were just starting out through till the point of on the cusp of being published.
Yeah, definitely. Like critiquing other texts have made me had more keen eye on myself as well. But I think like the setup of handling a lit magazine and not writing or not having time to write is kind of why we set up 탁Tak the way we did. That we have like a set schedule of the in-house writers, the people who then read the submissions. So that's like a motive, or what do you call it? Gives them the energy to actually read through all the submissions, because they need their space to write in as well.
So you both still write?
That is one thing that I've learned from handling the lit magazines that I had.
Right, but you are still both writing.
So what do you think is missing from the literary scene in London right now?
It's hard to know, and one thing I would probably say on this, which I'm finding more and more, is that I think it's probably the kind of question that needs to be answered by someone who is in their early to mid 20s. I think it's easy to make the mistake that as you get older that you can constantly come up with the right answers for everything. I think whilst we're pretty good at doing what we want to do now, I mean me personally, I'm running OpenPen how I want it to be, it's fine. But I think in terms of what's missing, I mean, I could sit here and speculate for hours, but I honestly think it's the kind of question that should be answered by someone coming through, because they're the people that sort of understand what is missing. For me, I don't really feel like there's a void anymore that needs to be filled. Like I feel like I filled that with OpenPen, so I don't really have that. Doesn't really feel like there's a burning question to me. Whereas I'm sure the people in their early to mid 20s who really do feel that they have that sort of burning question that needs to be answered. There's some sort of hole or void to be filled in the literary scene. So who knows what that is? I mean, maybe it's something completely different from what OpenPen is now. And I hope
obviously, aside from OpenPen, what do you feel is good? Like when you go out there and look, what do you feel is like this is good? This is what's hot now? Or
yeah, I mean, conversely, looking at some of the online journals at the moment and what they're doing and how they're conducting themselves. I've really got into a website. Things run by a guy called Fernando Strugotti, called Monoliths, and everything they put out is quite an interesting take on literature and how to review it, how to write fiction, how to write essays. It's different, and I think that's kind of goes back to what I was saying before, that there's something truly interesting in that. That's the kind of pick my brain now. Is when I see someone going about literary matters in a certain way, or a different way, a unique way. And I think it feels quite authentic as well. So that sort of thing's pretty good, worth checking out, Minor Lits. And then there are publishers out there as well, and a lot of these are London-based, and that's the nature of the scene that we're part of, is that it's the kind of thing you're going to be connected with more, and you're going to see more of. But publishers like Galley Beggar and Influx Press, they're all doing quite interesting things, and they're trying to put out books that they truly believe in. Aren't necessarily going to sell hundreds of thousands of copies, but they are going to make a statement that's not been made before.
It feels like, I think purpose is something that you really seem to go for. It's like totally. Having something to say. Is that what matters to you?
Yeah, absolutely. We recently, changed one of our taglines to that, is writing with something to say. And I think, hopefully, that people understand what I mean, that it's all very well saying something in an eloquent way. But if there's no meat behind it, if there's no interesting point to be made, then it's just not. Kind of got past the point now of reading stuff that's aesthetically pleasing, but actually outside of that doesn't really strike a chord. I think I've really got to that point now, and I'm just interested in reading material that makes a sort of striking or valid or relevant point to what's going on.
Yeah. So what new streams of literature, prose or poetry, do you see out there that you feel is like the future or holds promise?
Being totally unoriginal in this, in your recently reading, I'm getting through as predictable as it is for a 33-year-old white man, a lot of Karl Ove Knausgaard, is it? And I know that's so predictable, but I think there's something about that style of writing. Obviously, the sort of half memoir, half like novelization of memories. I think that it's going to be around for a good couple of decades now, and I think there's something interesting in that, because whenever anyone says, "Oh, the novel is dead," I think that what.
Oh wait, you said Knausgaard.
Yes. Sorry, my pronunciation is obviously.
No, don't worry. Karl Ove Knausgaard. Yeah, I know. Yeah, okay, I get it. Yeah.
Knausgaard.
Yeah. He's a Swede, so
to get to do this for me.
Norwegian,
now. Yeah. So
don't worry. Yeah, you were close. So.
Yeah, that sort of. I think there's something interesting in that. The idea of it's memoir-based novelization is quite an interesting tool. I think that other people, the problem with that is that the next few books that have come out that are similar to that style are going to be called copycat material. But actually, I think it's just opened up sort of not a new type of writing, because obviously Proust did this 100 years ago, right? But it's sort of it's back in vogue, and I think it's going to be around again for a few years. So I find
that something you try to emulate or try to write, this in the style yourself?
Every year, it's so hard to make sure that you're not just writing in the style of whatever you're taken with at that point. I think there's little point in doing that. As much as I like using that as a canvas, I think is certainly valid. But I try not to write in the style of the things that I'm reading at the time, because I know I've always been terrible for that. So it's something I try to avoid. So probably at the moment is to go off into sort of speculative fiction or something, just to get away from it. But I think eventually I'd certainly like to come around to writing that style of prose.
Well, generally, if you just start with something like that and you can just build on it, and it becomes something of your own rather than being entirely the beast of whoever you're reading.
Yeah, I think that's true, actually. I think a lot of my stuff is so I tend to write flash fiction or short stories that are, up to 1,000 words, and then if it's short stories, between 1,000 and 2,000 words. That seems to be where I like to play, as it were. And
difficult to fit a memoir.
It's very hard to sort of move on once you start writing something, and if you've got 500-600 words in a certain style, it's difficult to work away from that. It's not impossible, but I just think that it's, because of the short form, it's tough to kind of find your own voice in that a little bit. So I always start at the point of having a very clear idea in my head, maybe just a paragraph of how I want to say something, and then try and build the rest of the piece around that.
I think also in terms of like if you know that you are inspired or emulating someone and you kind of need the drive to push onward, like to not be that. There's also like I guess you got to be conscious about the text you're writing in order to push onward.
Yeah, that's true.
So, do you think the political aspects of like the coming future will change the way we write literature? The way we write. I mean, we have the Brexit, the Trump, the coming, French election, and the possible breakdown of the European Union. You think these things will kind of set a new stage for the relevance of literature, or possibly like a changing?
I think it has to, and I think that's from what we understand of history is that's generally how it's worked before, right? That you really start to get some, as you say, some relevant art out there. I just hope that the sort of writers who are writing fiction that I would consider relevant to their own lives, they're the writers that can then come in and start writing about, sort of more like wider social issues and wider political issues that we're faced with at the moment. And I think they will. I've got hopes for that. It's because it is important. I know that there is certainly an argument for how important art is in times like this. But, I think in time it becomes more important.
Is there a like moral imperative as a writer to question the powers that be, or can you like in a time of big changes can you still be like Karl Ove Knausgård and kind of do like the
I think if he was still going, he'd been affected by it. I think that he would probably keep on going in what he was doing, but I think it just it all comes from the sort of writing in this form, it comes from a burning desire to talk about the things that are important to you. And generally, I find that means the things that you feel frustrated with, and I mean frustrated in a much broader sense. So whilst 10 years ago, it might have a 24-year-old might have been frustrated with their life in that they broke up their girlfriend, blah, blah, blah. At 34, their world is bigger than that. And I think when there's a lot of political discourse and a lot more sort of scary stuff happening in the world as there is at the moment, I think that sort of takes over. So it's almost as if the place from which their writing comes from, that sort of desire to talk about the things that are truly frustrating in their lives, it's the subject matter that changes, but I think the desire remains the same.
All right. So we'll just keep on pushing towards the future. Will Open Pen exist in 5 years, you think, or 6 years if we double the?
So 6. Yeah, hopefully. I kind of have a plan in my head of what I want to be doing with the magazine over the next 4 years. I certainly want to get to the point of having another anthology out. We had an anthology out last year, and in between that time, hopefully, we're going to put out some novelettes. Haven't really broke that news yet, so a bit of an exclusive. But we're hoping to put out maybe 2 or 3 novelettes a year as well, and see how that goes. And then I think once we get to sort of 10 years, which is about 4 years away, release an anthology, and then we'll stand there. But ideally, someone young and more relevant to young writers will want to step in and take over the reins, and I can just sit back and occasionally read the magazine.
All right. I feel kind of because I'm the same age as you, and like you already start to feel irrelevant. It feels kind of bad.
That's scary. I think maybe I've heard that you can have a quarter life crisis. Maybe maybe that's probably a third life crisis for me now, right at 33. But maybe that's what I'm having.
Oh yeah, probably. I think we're gonna round up, but I was thinking of if you sort all the 6 years and you have to give like the advice of just if you can read one text, just this one text, what text would that be for you, like personally?
One text that I could read forevermore.
Yeah, from all the Open Pen anthologies.
Oh right, okay. So for every Open Pen ever. Oh man, wow, that's tough.
Is there like this one text that kind of
get me in trouble with like 19 other writers that will want me to say their their story. But
Well, you just have to pick one of your own in that case. It's easy.
I know my own stuff out in there. Maybe I should. Maybe that's what I'll do for the next anthology. But I think the one that I always think about when people ask this question. So to be fair, I'll try and be as honest as I can with it. Is a writer called Tag Muller, who I think is very much a case of what I was talking about earlier on, with a writer who, at the time he came to us, wasn't necessarily there as a writer. You know, he hadn't done the whole creative writing course. He wasn't Goldsmiths. He wasn't Oxbridge. He just someone who had a burning desire to write. And we rejected a few of his pieces, and he got really pissy with us in emails. And eventually he wrote this story sort of about the exchange that we had, but also his frustrations with the London writing scene. And then together we sort of worked out this story with it. You know, very much his stuff, but we worked on it. I worked on it as editor, and we eventually went with it as our issue 6 cover story. I think that's I always think back to that one because it felt like very much the reason why I started Open Pen. Writers like that and stories like that.
All right, that's a great answer. So I think we're going to round up and give a big thanks to you, Sean Preston, for coming here and having a talk with us at 탁Tak. And we wish you well in the future and with the coming anniversary. How will you celebrate, by the way? Or maybe you had like a...
Well, we're going to try to do a live event in the summer. So if you happen to be in London, you can enjoy some of our brief sunshine.
We were talking about that not long ago, so perhaps he will.
Great.
Yeah, exactly. I'm on my way. So yeah. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Let's see. How do I shut this off?